Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for letting me be here and talk about what we do, and kind of, it's more of a post-mortem of how we got where we are right now. So it's not that visionary, it's more descriptive. I, as I said, Mats-Olov Eriksson. I work with data platforms at King. How many of you have heard of King? That's quite a good response. We're usually known for our games more than the company, but I thought I should try and change that a bit just by talking about what we do and hopefully make you interested in some of the interesting stuff that we do. And as said, I work with data platforms. With social gaming, as of today, it's more or less mandatory to do tons of analytics for your games. And what we've seen is we went from a small, semi-small company into quite a big company, and especially in terms of traffic. So this is my story of how we managed to scale. But I thought I should just give you some introductions of who we are and how it all started. So we founded King in 2003 in Stockholm. It was 5 people that used to work for Spray. That was a big internet portal, and the .com era, who later crashed as everything else with .com. So they founded King, and it looked something like this. This is not the 2003 version though, but it was a page where you landed and you played tournaments against one or many people, and you wagered a small amount, and we took a rake from every tournament that happened. And this was skill gaming. And the reason we're very eager to point out that it was skill is that we are not under any gambling regulations or anything. So it's pure skill, meaning that we have the same random seed for all the participants in the tournament, so the best player wins. So it looked like this, and it did up until 2009, 10. I think it was 2010 when it really changed, thanks to Facebook. I don't know if is anyone involved in developing towards the Facebook API? Oh yeah, so you know all about that. And it was actually quite brave of Facebook when they decided to open up their APIs to third-party developers. And it tells you something about the company Facebook, because they seem to swallow just everything. Even mistakes with too many requests, they go unnoticed, more or less. So it's a very interesting platform, and thanks to them opening up their APIs, we could start utilizing all the features within Facebook, not only the friend network, but all the messaging, and just having a platform where almost 1 billion users had an account was like a tremendous reach for us as a game developer. So we started trying out different concepts on how to utilize the Facebook features, and you might have seen some of them. And I'll go into more depth of what we do with the Facebook platform. And after Facebook, we started doing mobile games. We had a few attempts before actually having a successful game out there. As always, you need to iterate. And we managed to have, in a year or so of trying out different concepts, we had something that worked on mobile, and also using the Facebook graph on mobile. And the depicted game is Candy Crush, that you might have heard of, which was not really in any budget whatsoever. It went through the roof, and as a bragging metric, I think we are like the biggest game in terms of number of users ever. So we reached 100 million users every day on Candy Crush just a few months ago. So that is a part of our scaling challenge. Just from the beginning of 2013, when we had about 20 million users, we reached 100 million users in less than 5 months, which put some strain on not only the machinery, but the people too, and the data side of things. So this is how we create the concepts that we have. We have the first section is the King platform, where we have a very hardcore, casual gaming audience. That's an oxymoron, but they are hardcore. lots of Europeans, mainly Germans, come into our king.com page and they play hours and they chat about it in the forums that we have, and we get instant feedback on whether a game is successful or not. And then we bring that to Facebook if it works out on king.com. We sagify it by having all the social features, the progression, the map, and everything that you've seen in our games. So that's step 2, and if it works out on Facebook, we take it to mobile. That's the process, extremely simplified. There are some steps in between, but anyhow, you get the idea. So what about scalability? As said, we reached 100 million users, and we also increased the ambition of the analytics side of games. And when I joined, we had one MySQL, or it was actually a sharded MySQL, so it was 2 machines running, taking care of all the tracking data that we had from King. And now we have about 15 billion records a day of just things happening in the game, and we're trying to get some value out of all that data. So in the very hyped up world of big data, we would definitely qualify it as a candidate for big data. I'll show you lots of examples of what we do with the analytics too, because Lex, another big company that does social games, there's this notion of analytics being only how to squeeze that last cent out of the user by having more products and more messages sent, being more spammy on whatever social network that you have. But we actually do quite a lot of analytics just to optimize the game and having a quantitative way of getting an understanding of how people interact with the game, because that's more or less the only window we have to look at the user. We don't do qualitative analysis. So, you might have seen this setup, and I'm not mocking this setup because I have designed several setups like this. Well, I am mocking myself from time to time, but not just now. So this is the game server. Usually you have your MySQL engine or whatever simple database engine to take care of the user data. So when you log in, there will be a request, and then you get some data back saying you're here and you've bought these products and these are your friends. You'd have traffic going back and forth. It's an ordinary relational database. And then you copy that into whatever data warehouse that you have to do some analytics on it. Or hopefully you copy that to a secondary database. I've been in situations where we did analytics in the production environment. Don't try that at home at all. And you get the dependency of the metadata for everything, especially the analytics metadata that is more of a subject to change. You have 3 dependencies on that metadata. This is a very typical setup, and it's actually quite a good setup if you don't have scalability ambitions. And you might not have, because some systems aren't really intended to have 100 million users putting 1,000 requests per day in. But if you, as I'll show you later, you'll see what we did in order to scale. So what we did, we decoupled the gaming databases with the analytics databases. That was the most important decision that we made. And then it looks something like this. I like PowerPoint animations, by the way. That's sort of the most techie side of me these days. It was quite some time since I actually produced code. So you have your game database. We changed that into having InnoDB. Doesn't really matter, but the important thing was that we have a key value storage for all the game data, making us more dynamic, and we could just put whatever we want in that key value storage for the user. So it's just a big JSON blob with all the user data. So we decreased the downtime of every release to just a few minutes, from having half an hour to an hour of downtime for every release, which in our world, when we have a global market, so there's no actual time where we can afford having 30 minutes of downtime just to make a release. So that was an important step. And the second important thing with this is that we started recording everything into log files instead of writing it to a database. And well, if you've tried writing lots of transactions into a database, you run into all the problems that you might have with simultaneous write and security and whatever transaction problems that you can find. So we take these log files and we put them in the data warehouse instead. And by this, we have only 2 dependencies on metadata, which is a good thing. Then we, at the analytics side, can mess about with the metadata as much as we want to. If we want some interesting stuff for the analytics side, we don't affect the product. And I think that's a very important thing for us to have as much decoupling as possible, because not everybody can feel responsible for keeping the product alive. So we need to have analysts. They're good at certain things, but not really. I don't want to be controversial, but they are not to be let into any production environment whatsoever. And I've been an analyst, so I can say that. So data warehousing was also an important part of how we managed to just cope with the amount of data that we had. And I'm a fanboy of the late, great Ralph Kimball, who invented data warehousing at Xerox in 1970-something. And this one reason that I like to show the Ralph Kimball image is because we kind of did everything ourselves, and we were being very young and full of ourselves, chronically incapable of taking a good advice from anyone. So we kind of refused to do all the basic stuff for data warehousing for quite some time, but then we started thinking that, well, somebody has already invented all this, so why not just do it right? So we have restructured everything according to the Kimball-esque model. So we went from having all these unstructured events with everything into something really fancy like this. So this is the data warehouse, I know, 2013. If you're into data warehousing, you know what that is. If you're not, let's just go on to the analytics side. And then the product. I'm not a big fan of talking about the product and BI as some sort of separate entities, because what we've done is we've organized ourselves so that BI is integrated with all the game teams. A game team usually consists of a producer and some sort of a business dude who takes care of the game, how it is perceived by players, like if we have the relevant products out there and so forth. And then we have a data scientist within each game team. So that holy trio of people is responsible for everything with the game, and the data scientist would take care of all the analytics and the tracking side of the game. Data scientist, if you haven't heard that title, don't worry about it. It was invented less than 2 years ago to meet the need of describing an analyst that could code. Because the typical analyst, at least the ones that I've been involved with, like 10 years ago, they were statisticians or mathematicians, and you run into a problem when you can't be self-sustainable in terms of cleaning your own data or extracting your own data out of a warehouse, or actually writing some machine learning code to feed back data into the game so that you could do something that is more optimized for the current user group. So data scientist is the name for the technical analyst. So short about that. But from the technical side, how did we go about actually helping product to be very BI friendly? That's the metadata-driven data warehouse. And I keep going on and on about the metadata. It's my favorite topic. So if you remember this setup and the metadata that controlled the game servers and the data warehouse. And more metadata, more animations. This is a game developer. He or she works in a game called Bubble Witch Saga. If you've played Bubble Witch Saga, it's a game that we currently develop in Bucharest. And we have it on Facebook and mobile and on the king.com page. It's a classical bubble shooter with the Saga format where you progress throughout the map. And this is actually a true example of what we did at the very beginning, when we had only a few tracking data points, and we realized that in the game end, we couldn't use only the score of each game round. We wanted the stars too, which might seem obvious looking backwards, but we need the stars because stars is what people perceive on the map. That's what people punts. They want more stars. So we wanted to, for each game end, not only track the score, we wanted to track the number of stars that you achieved. And this is the iteration on how we could just have that in production 2 weeks later after the idea. So this game developer gets an idea, checks in the metadata, if we have anything that we could use to track this. Probably not, so there's an implementation happening. And the game developer goes to the game team, or the game developer's team actually, and implements this. And the next release, you have that new event tracking stars being written into log files, which is kind of smooth because we didn't need any alter table or anything, because at the parsing stage, we use the metadata to then interpret the log files. So since the metadata controls how we write it and the metadata controls how we parse it, we get a closed loop from the tracking to the actual parsing, meaning that we reduce the risk of someone writing something that we in the data warehouse cannot interpret. Then we use Hadoop. If you've heard of Hadoop, it's an open source, very scalable framework for MapReduce and, well, big data. It has become synonymous with big data. And as the interface to Hadoop, we use Hive, which is working. We are looking at putting something else in place. If you're interested in data warehousing, come by later and we can talk about Yarn and Hive 2 or Impala. So that the metadata is also used then to create the structure within the data warehouse. And then we have the data scientist embedded in the team, wanting to query this to see how many people reached 3 stars, or the most important question, how many people go back to replay a level where they didn't reach 3 stars. We get a lot of people's affection when it comes to having those 3 stars to show off with their friends. So the data scientist looks in the metadata. What should I look for? What event is tracking the number of stars? Get a response, queries the database, gets a result, and there will be profit from all this. And I think I've grown quite spoiled in this since I've been working with this platform for the past 3 years. But a 2-week iteration cycle from an idea of tracking something to actually seeing that in the database and start using that for fine-tuning the game is quite a fast turnover. And it's also good to have these events because we always need to add something over time. We never really get it right from the very beginning. So this, as you can see, it's called credits transaction. And over the past 12 months, we have changed it 6 times. So credits transaction, that's the Facebook currency. So every time someone uses the Facebook credits, we record it in an event that we call credits transaction. And things have just been added. Like you can see on the 5, we started adding placements so we could see where in the game someone purchased something, and so on. So it makes us quite agile on the analytics and tracking side. And I'm not a BI dude, so I usually don't talk about governance and whatnot, but eventually I've grown into liking the whole concept of governing the product and the analytics by using smart technology instead of using business meetings. So in a way you could say that the centralized metadata is governance, and if you can sell this idea upwards in the hierarchy that we are applying governance to our data, you most often get a buy-in from management. So if you want to call it governance, do it, because it sort of lubricates the whole decision-making process. And then reporting. What do we do with all this data? I'll show you some examples of the reporting. We have our dashboards, of course. We have our player value. We need to know what, on an average, what do we get in return for a user that we acquire in any way. We get a lot of users just through virality. We have, as most developers in our area, we have certain blocks that you need help from your friends to pass, which is a smart way of achieving that virality, because you can send messages using the Facebook graph And of course, we have the financial side of things. Finance need to get their stuff in order for everything from just seeing the top line revenue to finding a way to recognize revenue over time if you have a durable product. It has been an interesting journey. I didn't really know that you had to defer revenue from a lollipop hammer, because you might enjoy the lollipop hammer next month, meaning that the revenue needs to be split in 2 months. So it's a weird situation when you sit there with auditors and you talk about lollipop hammers like it was the most serious thing ever. But it is, I guess. And of course, we do report on the economics side of it. And when I say economics, I mean things like having a currency within a game. We need to monitor the parameters we have to see whether the value of the currency, how is that perceived from users? Because what we do is more or less to build our own economy, having a central bank being the only one that can hand out the currency, and then we also set the prices. And that is kind of complicated, because it's complicated enough to set a price in US dollars for that lollipop hammer, but it's even more complicated when you have a King Gold bar in 3 games, and then you have a rocket launcher in Pet Rescue, and you need to have a relevant price for that compared to the price of a lollipop hammer in gold bars. And we need to sort of have some constant monitoring over how that is perceived by users. Because we're a big company, and we want to have lots of games with the same currency, and we want the value of it to be consistent. So things like inflation. But that's also very interesting to me, because I am a part-time economist too. So I like setting up this small world where I can play around with certain parameters like the price of the currency. And then of course we get a lot of external data, just either for reconciliation or whatever. So we report on that. And debug came on the 6th place, but it's actually quite important. And we do have a lot of dashboards just to monitor health logs from the games, how many errors that we have, exceptions being thrown, and disconnects on mobile is quite important to monitor. Mobile turned out to be harder than we thought. I remember, I think it was 2 years ago when we started looking at the TCP/IP stack for the back end of mobile, and one of the smartest people that I've ever worked with, our chief architect for server platforms, actually said that TCP/IP should be enough in terms of redundancy. And that's probably also the only time that he's been wrong, but very wrong. Mobile is quite different than a landline. That's all I have to say about the shortcomings of the stability in mobile internet communication. So we've done a lot of work just to debug the client-side communication back to servers, making sure that we don't have too many requests, flooding, or just that we miss certain important information that we need from the games. And then game performance, of course. That could be just anything. That is what we report on. And is there a difference between report and science? I don't really know, but science is more ad hoc based, so the data scientist could do a deep dive on a certain issue that the producer wants to look into. We do a lot of A/B testing. Almost all features are thoroughly tested before we roll them out in the full scale over all games or just the whole game. So if we want to try a sort of a separate track in the progression, we make sure to A/B test that to see if there's something that the users like. An A/B test is the multivariate test, where you have a small test group seeing this new behavior. You compare that with the large mass that sees the existing behavior, and then see if it's worth it to pursue. And feature performance goes into A/B testing. Game interaction is quite interesting, just to see if there's differences between what you do on Canvas. When I say Canvas, I mean all the desktop games. We usually refer to Facebook as Canvas. And mobile, because it's, to say the least, it's different to play a game with a touchpad than on Canvas, and we want that to be very much the same experience. I have a good case study on what we did to discover some nuances of that difference. And cross-platform. If you develop on multiple platforms and you want that, it's important to monitor how they move between the two platforms. Usually we see the behavior that you play on mobile when you commute to work, and then you play on desktop, hopefully only during lunchtime, and then when you go back, you'd play on mobile again. When you get home, you stop playing on your mobile device, as in your iPhone or your phone, and then you bring up your tablet or phablet or whatever they call it. And it's important to know what they play on in terms of platform, because all the platforms has different attributes, and we want to monitor that. And of course, the cross-game behavior. We have many games, and we want to have an ecosystem where if you get sick of a switcher, note that we are in casual games only. I've seen some of the games that are being demoed down here. They're brilliant games, and there will be a day when I work with AAA too, but I'm getting used to this casual thing. We are not here to tell you stories about enemies becoming friends and dragons and princesses. We are more to, well, help you kill some time while you commute. And I'm fine with that. It's actually quite an important mission. But the cross-game behavior, so if you play a bubble shooter, is it likely that you will prefer a switcher game too? Or should we direct you to a clicker game? That sort of things that we try to analyze. It's kind of hard because that's predicting what you like based on how you interact with one game type, but it's worth an effort because we want to cross-promote you between different games. And then the economic side, of course, too, goes into science. Segmentation. We do a lot of segmentation of the user profiles that we have, because there's no way that we can do an individual analysis of the 100 million daily users that we have. We try to categorize people, which is okay only in analytics, but we like to have a label on you so that we know that you're a skilled gamer. You're quite good. You complete all the levels in no time, so you're just hanging on the lock to get that next episode that we will release in 2 weeks. And it's important for us to have a label on those people so that we can group them and target them differently with messages and so forth. And then the virality, of course. I know that some of you might think of us as a spamming company on Facebook, and sometimes perhaps we are, but we do try to minimize the spam, and we're getting better at it. Because the more we can analyze the effect a certain kind of channel has, the more users we can acquire through this channel by being more efficient, means that we can reduce the number of messages. So that's an important mission for the data scientists, to see evaluate the quality of each channel that we have of communication, whether that is Facebook messages, it could be emails, it could be the forums and the fan pages that we have, it could be the app in-app messages that Apple provides. And then, of course, the debug too. We have a lot of data scientists working on just looking through games to see if there's a irrational behavior. And I did this for a more BI-oriented crowd, but it could be worth it showing it to you, so how the whole process of how an ad hoc thing turns into a daily report. Usually it starts with a data scientist. That is to symbolize the number of academic years that data scientist has. Usually coming up with an analysis. This, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I copied this from Wikipedia, but I think it's correlation. You might correct me on that. And that analysis is usually presented in Excel. That then goes to a manager. Manager is very grateful. We could make some more money out of that, or we could just, well, drop it. If you've ever been in analytics, you know that not even half of what you do will be used. But that's like everything. You will see your projects being canned if they're not super interesting. But it could also be that the manager says, we want to slice and dice. And this, I think, is very important for us to have managers that are very analytics savvy and interested, because a producer of an online game needs not only to be interested in the actual quality of the game as it's perceived when you play it, but you need also to be interested in how is this game perceived by the users and how can we measure this. So we do require a good analytics mindset from producers and business managers. And then that data scientist goes to the working in the ClickView team. I don't know if you've heard of ClickView, but we use that as a presentation tool because it's quite nice if you want to slice and dice between lots of dimensions. In our main dashboard, we have at least 15 dimensions, such as country, what device, screen resolution, when you install the game, and so forth. So we need something that can handle all these dimensions. And we take that in, and the ClickView report is presented. And by now, you know what will happen. There's a grateful manager somewhere who will make more money out of this, or then pipe that, or we could just say that this is so interesting that we should distribute this across the whole company. Every producer should wake up and look at this report while eating breakfast cereals. It's that important. So then we put that report into production by the hungry reporting team, and then we have all that comes with having something in production, like proper version control, and ETL to support that report, and a good data mart for it. So this is not something that we decided on when we started. It just turned into this, and it works for us. And I think that's what I like about being the pioneer and the king analytics side, is that we got to learn from our mistakes and set it up the way we wanted to. So all the processes that we have is more organically produced than someone coming up with an idea before starting. And this is just the importance of not having ClickView as your data warehouse. So as you can see, from having only ClickView, we now have a data warehouse. We put a fast database. If you've not heard of Exasol, it could be worth checking out. It's quite an interesting thing. It's unfortunately not open source, but it's super fast. And we do that to just have a low latency layer on top of the big chunk of data that we have. So we have learned how to distribute workload across different products that are optimized to do just that. So we do the ETL in Exasol, we do the heavy lifting in Hadoop, and we do the presentation in ClickView. So that's an important lesson that we learned. And this is an example of our report. And as you can see, we have lots of dimensions. We want to know the kingdom origin. How did you get into what we call the kingdom? What was your first game? Was it a mobile game? Was it a Facebook game? And we want to see things like tier. Tier would be the categorization I mentioned when we put labels on people. And it could be when you installed and things that are interesting. And this is the main dashboard that the whole management layer looks at, including the top level management. And of course, we want to use this kind of presentation just for comparison. Don't mind the dogs. They're just there to obfuscate, because I thought I should put in some scrambled random data, but that was, I was lazy and just covered up the true numbers. So this is an actual report, but I had to hide the values. And so we do a lot of this kind of stuff. We have at least 150 ClickView reports being updated every day with some aspect of the game performance. And that's the final section on how am I on time. Hopefully that started before I started. So 2 examples of what we did with the analytics that helped us fine-tune the game. One would be the challenge and the progression. We try to make everything harder and harder as you progress throughout the map, but we don't want to have a blocker like in level 5. You get stuck and then you try it 200 times and then you leave the game. So we tried different ways of having a quantitative way of looking at how hard a level is, and to make sure that users didn't get stuck. And then we discovered one thing. This is level 65 in Candy Crush. It turned out to be quite difficult. And even though we have the most rigorous quality control ever, and we never have bugs in any of our game, this happened because the producer of the game tried that level and had like a 3-star score first attempt, and he said, you need to make this harder. It turned out that he was like 1 in a million to get that random seed. So they made that level harder, and after a while, the average number of attempts before completing it was 150. And 150 attempts on average means that you have those crazy people trying 500 times before completing it. Not crazy, devoted, of course. That's a better word. English is not my first language, so sometimes I confuse crazy and devoted. But level 65 was, we needed to monitor this. This was sort of the Lex 65 report. So we wrote some code, we put that into ClickView, and this I have added just lots of dimensions to obfuscate the data, but this helps us seeing the number of attempts and the users that are stuck on a level. So what you see here is stuck on a level data. And as we have 450 levels of Candy Crush, it's almost impossible to do this without some sort of visualization. And that's why we put this into such a report. And this is what all the producers look at to make sure that the level of difficulty increases in an organized fashion. And the second example is, well, I think this is more interesting because this utilizes a visualization method that I take no credit for, but the smart people that I've hired came up with it. So 184, this is to analyze if we manage to make the game the same on the mobile platform as we have on the Facebook platform. We start with the Facebook platform and then we move it into mobile. But in some cases, the behavior is not exactly the same. As you all know, you can't have Flash on mobile, for instance, so we have to rewrite everything into Objective-C and C++. And it's not frictionless, and we're always in a hurry. So what happened was that on 184, in the Objective-C engine, the chocolate behavior is slightly different on mobile than it is on the Facebook platform. And that might sound harmless, but if you try to play Candy Crush, you know that the chocolate spreads and you're out of moves and you're doomed. So when the chocolate spreads and you can't kill it diagonally, this level is close to impossible to complete. And therefore, we needed the way of monitoring the interaction on mobile with Facebook. So again, we wrote some code, presented it in ClickView. We came up with this report. This is also something that the producer of the game and game designers, level designers, they look at to see how many, on the y-axis you have the attempts on mobile before completing it, and on the x-axis you have the attempts on canvas before you complete it. And this, if it doesn't follow the 45-degree line, you are supposed to investigate that. Because that we expect the game to be as hard on mobile as on canvas. And that was about it for the presentation. I left a few minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions, will you moderate the Q&A session?
Oh, okay. So I'll start with the front row.
Hi. I would like to ask, how do you get the data from the client? You mentioned you have Flash games. So are you also measuring things that happen only in the Flash? Or do you make the logs that you log only on server side? I mean, where you generate the data?
Yeah. So we have the methods server side that we can call either from the Flash or the client backend. So, well, in the Flash case, we need to call the client backend, and then the client backend calls, because Flash is a very confined environment. But yes, we do have calls. Is it me making the noise? Yeah. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So hi, thank you for the presentation. It was really nice. I enjoyed it. I got a million questions, but I have to ask only one, I guess. Recently, you have implemented economics in the Candy Crush Saga before you were using only microtransactions. And my concern is, how did you prepare for this implementation of that virtual currency? And if you, since you said that you get around 160 games on the King, and a lot of these games are really similar, that if some of those smaller projects, which doesn't have that many players, are used as a more like, not like monetization project, but more like analytics lab, where you try something on the similar players and then you implement it on the Candy Crush Saga?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I wish we would had a lab before going out with the virtual currency. But what we did was to have lots of A/B testing going on beforehand. So first thing we did was to take a percentage of the users, giving them a hard currency that they could use in the game. But even this is dangerous because a percentage, 1% of 100 million users is still, that could result in some negative feedback on the fan pages if we're not careful. So yeah, I wish we had a small game on King.com that we could try virtual currency, but due to external circumstances, labeled Facebook changing their payment engine, we didn't have that much time. But let's set up a lab environment.
Hi. I was just wondering, in what time frame do you measure the player value?
Time frame like the ROI on acquisition of players.
Well, do you measure it in like months, or what's?
Well, the
what's
simple
player
answer
value
to that
for you?
question is every time frame. That's up to the. That's if you saw the report, it kind of allows you to see player value at any point in time. So we could have a 30-day. Well, then you just look at the accumulated value after 30 days. But if you want 180 days, well, look at the accumulated value in 180 days. So we try to have. We kind of have a way of presenting reports so that we enable the end user, in this case the producer or the business manager. So that's why we needed a smart reporting tool such as ClickView. You have your Spotfire, SAS too. They do practically the same thing. And to let them have as much data as possible so they do the slicing and dicing. So BI wouldn't set the time frame for which you look at ROI. That's up to the producer just clicking away in the reporting tool.
So basically, you don't have any fixed time value that you would use for planning marketing campaigns? Or
Oh yes, of course we
users
have,
or
but I
anything?
can't
You
share
do.
that.
Hi, thanks for the insights. By the way, I'm also stuck on level 65. So
Oh, yeah, you're not alone.
yeah. And I was just wondering if you could share these numbers with us. How many % of your registrations come from cross-promotion, and how many % of your registrations come from open graphs? Thank you.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, firstly, I don't think I'm allowed to share, but secondly, I don't know, to be honest. I am a facilitator of smart people that remember numbers. So luckily, I don't have to.
Hello. You mentioned dimensional modeling and ETL processes. Could you tell us about the level of granularity in your fact tables, which you are?
It's a user level. Everything is on user level. You identified by either your Facebook ID. It's actually not the Facebook ID, but we have a version of the Facebook ID at our side. Or if you don't connect to any social graph, we use your device ID. On Android, we can get your Android secure ID, and on Apple, we can get your IDFA.
I mean the level of granularity of the fact table. For example, like player event, like, I don't know. So, do you have data mars which are on this the lowest granularity, which you can extract from the Hadoop?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I meant when we have it on the user level. So we start with, first you have the raw data, all the log files, and then we refine that into having fact tables with the user level data. So everything that you could do, we could have a spend table, we could have your gameplay table, and we could have your, like a dimension table with all your attributes. And that we all have on the user level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was like wondering with the amount of data you collect, whether these, the SQL database manages to do the aggregations well. Yeah, because if you are having millions of daily active users, this also means that on this level of granularity.
Yeah, we do get quite some data, and we have a few machines humming every night to the detail. Yeah, I'm happy to take more questions. Just a side note, we are, of course, growing as a company, and the guy down here, looking awfully Canadian, if you're interested in what King is, he's happy to share more information about what we do in Stockholm, Malmö, Bucharest, Barcelona, or wherever. So that's a good thing. We have an app that you could download. We actually unlocked the app. We used to have it in Sweden only, but we unlocked it for Czech Republic this weekend so that you can try what we call the King Challenge. It's some sort of interesting quiz to see if you're up for any of the areas that we have. Could be fun entertainment if you want to try it.
So we have time for last question.
I would like to ask, how do you manage the consistency of data when there are several developer teams on several developer platforms and various versions of games in the wild? So how do you make sure that they report the same things with the same meaning?
Yeah, we cover about 70% of the consistency by having the metadata and the methods used for tracking centralized. So there are only a few people, well, I think more people have access, but only 2 or 3 have the balls to actually go in there and change the metadata, because you affect the next report, and senior management will come and say hi if you mess it up. But we make sure that a game would use the same method of tracking a certain event. That does not mean that we are guaranteed that the parameters that you send with this request are correct. And yeah, we've had a few incidents. And we have no perfect way of handling that yet. It's still lots of cat herding done by me. I spent some time in different studios talking about the importance of getting it correct and showing people what they can do. So I don't think there's a way of guaranteeing the consistency, but we tried to make people interested enough in the data so that they are interested in the quality of it. If the game producer and if the game developer can get a benefit out of the data, we get some sort of buy-in from them to get everything right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
We are here the rest of the day, so if you want to have a conversation about metadata or metadata, I'm perfectly open for such a conversation.
thank you very much, Mats.
Thank you.